coming up on The World Today. The ECOWAS Court of Justice announces an order restraining the Nigerian federal government on prosecuting Nigerians using Twitter under the ban. The Spanish government formally pardons 9 Catalan separatists convicted over a failed independence bid in 2017. Plus, voting continues in some areas in Ethiopia, while counting begins in others. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Akaite Afia. Today, when you're watching The World Today, we'll begin in Abuja, where ECOWAS Court of Justice has restrained the Nigerian federal government from imposing sanctions or harassing, intimidating, arresting, or prosecuting Twitter and or any other social media service providers, as well as media houses, pending the hearing and determination of a suit challenging the government's suspension of Twitter operations in Nigeria. The suit in question was filed by the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project and 176 concerned Nigerians, arguing that the suspension of Twitter by the Nigerian government was illegal. The ECOWAS court gave the order after hearing arguments from Serap's lawyer, Femi Falana, and lawyer to the government, Maimuna Shiru. It then said any interference with Twitter is viewed as interference with human rights, and that will violate human rights. Therefore, this court has jurisdiction to hear the case. The court also hereby orders that the application be heard expeditiously. The Nigerian government must take immediate steps to implement the order. Joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Nena Ifeanyi-Jufo, a Nigerian lawyer and academic specializing in law and technology. She's also a senior lecturer of law and technology at the School of Law, Swansea University in the United Kingdom. Dr. Ifeanyi-Jufo, thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Of course. So you've seen the ruling by the ECOWAS Court of Justice. What's your interpretation of this?
Absolutely impressive. This is a win for digital rights. And what it means is that the government of Nigeria right now has to reverse its suspension of Twitter. And of course, disregard the idea that it can criminally prosecute anyone for using Twitter. So what happens now is this is an injunction, and we will still wait for the substantive suit for 6th of July 2021. And Nigeria is a signatory to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and through the Constitution, Section 39, it recognizes the right to freedom of expression. So it behoves on Nigeria now to adopt the ruling of the ECOWAS Court. So absolutely the way to go. And I must say that this is not anything new. The ECOWAS Court has been making rulings regarding issues of human rights in cases related to Nigeria. And last year as well, it made a similar ruling in regards to the Cybercrime Act of Nigeria. And for other ECOWAS states, there have been similar rulings. So that is what it is. Nigeria has to reverse its suspension pending the substantive suit or the hearing of the substantive suit for 6th of July.
Well, you did mention that there has been other hearings, but how binding is this specific court ruling in Nigeria?
Yes, the court has jurisdiction to hear this, and it's absolutely binding on Nigeria. Now, citizens of ECOWAS member states can file complaints against human rights violations of state actors in this court. It is the ECOWAS member states themselves who decided to give the court a specific mandate regarding human rights. So the court rules according to the provisions of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and the decisions are legally binding on the ECOWAS member states. And one thing you find that is very important about the ECOWAS court's jurisdiction is that, you do not have to exhaust local remedies before bringing cases to ECOWAS court. So Nigeria is a member state of ECOWAS. Nigeria is a signatory to the ECOWAS Treaty, which is the protocol establishing the ECOWAS court. Nigeria is a signatory to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and the same Nigeria has domesticated, the provisions in line with Section 12 of the 1999 Constitution. So it is incumbent, it is very important that Nigeria has to respect the decision of the ECOWAS court. But you find that, unfortunately, there is no clearly stipulated enforcement mechanism for the court. So what you tend to see is a disregard of the rulings and decisions of the court by member states, and then you begin to hear notions like the court is just a toothless bulldog, but the ruling is binding, just as other rulings by the court is binding on Nigeria and other ECOWAS member states.
And I'm sure many people want to know this, but what should Nigerians do now?
You know, Nigerians have been using Twitter via VPN. Nigerians, just to keep using Twitter. But then, what I must say is that there is no law criminalizing the use of social media in Nigeria. There is no law criminalizing use of social media. You can criminalize the use of social media for illegal activities, but you can't criminalize, you're not criminalizing use of social media. And one point I must say is it's okay for people to use VPNs, but VPNs can be the basis of using the internet for illegal activities. It is better that Nigerians use Twitter openly. You are sure of where they are virtually, for crime and prevention of crime and for national security, rather than allowing people use VPNs. And I would also say we should wait for 6th of July and see how we will triumph in this regard. And I must also say that, we should give an overwhelming support to the Socioeconomic Rights and Accountability Project. They've done exceedingly well. This is a win for all Nigerians and not just for a group of Nigerians. And thanks to Femi Falana as well for this pace-setting effort in this regard. So, absolutely, we'll look forward to an impressive result from the ruling based on the substantive suit on the 6th of July.
We definitely will be looking to see what happens there. And thanks again, Dr. Ifeanyi Ajufo, and do stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The U.S. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby says while deadlines for U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan remains in place, the pace may change, becoming slower in light of recent battlefield victories by the Taliban. Officials had said last week that the withdrawal is already about halfway done. Afghanistan itself is seeing increasing violence as the U.S. and NATO prepare to pull out their remaining troops. Mr. Kirby says the U.S. continues to monitor the situation and comparing to what additional resources needed to move out of Afghanistan and at what pace. Earlier, the UN Special Envoy on Afghanistan, Deborah Leon, said the Taliban had taken more than 50 of 370 districts since May, warning that increased conflict means increased insecurity for many other countries near and far. Catalan regional leader Pere Aragonès says that pardons to jailed Catalan leaders are not enough and has asked for an amnesty from the central government. This comes after the Spanish government formally pardoned 9 separatists who were convicted over a failed independence bid in 2017. The leaders were imprisoned after being found guilty of sedition in 2019. There were others convicted of disobedience but not jailed at the same time.
Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, chaired a government meeting in which he announced that he will approve the pardons of the 9 jailed Catalan leaders of Catalonia's failed 2017 independence bid. The rubber stamp approval should be followed by the separatist release from jail just days later. Prime Minister Sanchez feels seeking reconciliation with Catalonia is in the public's interest.
Y tras sopesar las razones a favor y en contra de la medida de gracia,
after pondering the reasons against and in favor of the measure of grace, the government has considered that there are reasons of public utility to approve the pardons. All the pardons are conditioned to not committing a serious crime during a fixed period of time. Otherwise, the pardon will be cancelled.
Del mismo modo, todos los indultos.
But the move is considered to be unpopular, as polls suggest about 60% of citizens are against freeing the politicians and activists.
Yo creo que la justicia tiene que estar para todos.
I do not believe that it sets a good example for the citizens that someone who commits a crime suddenly receives a measure of grace that makes punishing crime no longer effective. I believe that we are all under the same umbrella of justice, and I do not agree with the decision to pardon.
Catalonia's separatist head of government said the pardons were a welcome first step to start a dialogue, but deemed them insufficient, vowing to push for a new, authorized referendum. Spain's Supreme Court in 2019 sentenced the 9 Catalan leaders for their role in an unauthorized independence referendum and a short-lived declaration of independence. Madrid responded at the time by imposing direct control over the region for 7 months in 2017 to 2018.
Well, let's check in briefly in Myanmar as security forces raided a house in Mandalay, killing 4 so-called terrorists, then shooting dead another 4 as they were driving in a vehicle. This was all reported by the country's army-owned television, the Maiwadi television. 8 people were reportedly arrested during the raid, and some security personnel were seriously hurt. Since the army took over power forcefully on February 1st, groups of opponents of the coup known as People's Defense Forces have sprung up across the country. In the meantime, a flash mob of protesters took to the streets of Yangon, the Myanmar capital, in support of the new militia group. More than 40 countries in the world are calling on China to allow UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet immediate access to Xinjiang region to look into reports that more than 1 million people have been unlawfully detained there, and some even subjected to torture or forced labor. The joint statement on China was read out by Canada's Ambassador Leslie Norton on behalf of countries including Australia, Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and the United States to the Human Rights Council. Beijing denies all allegations of abuse of Uyghurs and describes the camps as vocational training facilities to combat religious extremism. It was just yesterday that Ms. Bachelet had told the Human Rights Council that she hoped to agree on terms for a visit this year to China, including Xinjiang, to examine reports of serious violations against Muslim Uyghurs. Her office has been negotiating access since September 2018.
We're gravely concerned about the human rights situation in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Credible reports indicate that over 1 million people have been arbitrarily detained in Xinjiang and that there's widespread surveillance disproportionately targeting Uyghurs and members of other minorities and restrictions on fundamental freedoms and Uyghur culture. There are also reports of torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, forced sterilization, sexual and gender-based violence, and forced separation of children from their parents by authorities. We urge China to allow immediate, meaningful, and unfettered access to Xinjiang for independent observers, including the High Commissioner, and to urgently implement the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination's 8 recommendations related to Xinjiang, including by ending the arbitrary detention of Uyghurs and members of other Muslim minorities.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has been commenting on the U.S. Commerce Department rescinding bans on apps such as TikTok and WeChat, calling it a positive step in the correct direction. The U.S. on Monday, June 21st, rescinded a list of prohibited transactions with TikTok and WeChat that were issued in September as the Trump administration sought to block new U.S. downloads of both Chinese-owned apps. The withdrawals came after President Joe Biden this month withdrew a series of Trump-era executive orders that sought to ban new downloads of Tencent-owned WeChat and TikTok, and ordered a Commerce Department review of security concerns posed by those on the apps and others. Hong Kong Court of Appeal has upheld a court decision to deny a trial by jury to the first person charged under a new national security law, a landmark decision that marks a departure from the global financial hub's common law tradition. Last month, the Court of First Instance in the High Court ruled that Tong Ying Kit would face a trial without jury, citing, quote, a perceived risk of the personal safety of jurors and their family members. His lawyer appealed. Police say Tong carried a sign reading, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," and drove his motorbike into officers during a protest on July 1st, knocking down a narrow street before falling over and getting arrested. It was the first day on which the security law that Beijing imposed on the city, targeting what China deems as secession, separatism, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces, was in force. The 24-year-old Tong was charged with inciting separatism and terrorism. Still to come on The World Today. It's been 80 years since Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and the country remembers. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Checking in on the elections in Ethiopia, we are learning that at least 3 people have been killed after an attack around a polling station about 160 kilometers from the capital, Addis Ababa. A source within the electoral board says the attack took place yesterday morning and that the people killed were a police officer, a militia member, and a local official. Armed men reportedly opened fire on people around the polling station in Libanjawi district, 50 kilometers from Ambo town. The attackers reportedly said the election was a sham and they should disrupt the voting process. Meanwhile, voting continued in some parts of the country today after challenges in some areas, while ballot counting has begun in most areas. The National Electoral Board of Ethiopia chairperson, Bertukan Medeska, said some constituencies and polling stations encountered problems, including shortages of ballot materials and unjustified interventions by local officials. The voting was extended by 3 hours across the country on Monday because of logistical challenges. The board said voting would resume on Tuesday in some areas of eastern Ethiopia, as well as in the western Oromia region. We continue to monitor the coronavirus pandemic around the world. Here's the update.
Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte threatens that anyone who refuses to get vaccinated will be sent to jail or given shots meant for pigs.
Sabi ko sa iyo, yung silda dyan sa mga
you get vaccinated, or otherwise I will order all the village heads to have a tally of all the people who refuse to get vaccinated. Because if not, I will inject them with ivermectin, which is intended for pigs.
Legally, of course.
His remarks contradict those of his health officials who have said that while people are urged to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, it was voluntary and has left residents in the country's capital, Manila, upset. In Israel, growing fears of the Delta variant are prompting reluctant parents to get their children vaccinated. This comes as the number of daily cases more than doubled to 125 on Monday. Israel's 2 largest healthcare providers that cover most of the country's 9 million population say appointments for 12 to 15-year-old vaccinations have doubled and tripled in the last few days. And as the pandemic wanes, some of the first tourists of the season enjoy a trip on the River Seine in Paris after a year and a half of travel bans and restrictions.
We planned it last year, but we had to pause everything because of the pandemic. And once we heard that the country was opening up, we got vaccinated, and here we are. We were one of the first groups to arrive in Europe.
With infection rates falling, France has dropped the mandate requiring people to wear masks outdoors and rescinded its 11 p.m. curfew. And finally, the Russian government says those who are not vaccinated against COVID-19 or do not have immunity would be unable to work in all workplaces and could be discriminated against. In an effort to compel citizens to get vaccinated, authorities are offering those who do the chance to win new cars and flats, while threatening those who don't with loss of earnings and dismissal.
Nigeria will be benefiting from the approximately 14 million or 25% of the 55 million COVID-19 vaccines being given by the United States, alongside other recipients such as Colombia, Argentina, Haiti, other CARICOM countries, Kenya, Ghana, and many more. This comes weeks after the Biden-Harris administration announced it would be distributing 55 million of the 80 million doses of America's own vaccine supply that President Biden pledged to allocate by the end of June in service of ending the pandemic globally. A statement from the government says in addition to sharing doses from America's own vaccine supply, the Biden-Harris administration is also committed to working with U.S. manufacturers to produce more vaccines to share with the world. Therefore, the president has announced the purchase of 500 million Pfizer doses to donate to 92 low and lower middle income countries and members of the African Union. Floods from heavy rains in several eastern Indian states has forced residents out of their homes as whole streets and residential areas are submerged in rainwater. Last month, more than 150,000 people were left homeless in the aftermath of Cyclone Yas that unleashed storm surges in eastern India and Bangladesh, with heavy rains hampering relief work in some low-lying coastal areas. And over in France, the city of Beauvais in northern France saw heavy flooding overnight after storms hit the area. Video shows residents in the streets as floodwater flows in waves several centimeters deep. A supercell thunderstorm loomed over the northern French on Saturday, June 19th, and the weather agency called it the country's darkest day this year. French forecaster Météo France says that the country recorded around 44,000 lightning strikes on Saturday, with heavy rains and floods reported in several areas. Lake Mead, the reservoir in Nevada created by the Hoover Dam, has sunk to its lowest level ever, underscoring the gravity of the extreme drought across the United States West Coast. Bleached white embankments all around the dam, an engineering marvel that symbolized the American ascendance of the 20th century, show how far the water level has dropped from its usual level. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. It is crucial to the water supply of 25 million people, including in the cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Vegas. Hoover Dam generates hydroelectric power to serve 1.3 million people in the states of Nevada, Arizona, and California. And finally on the program, it was a solemn affair as Russian President Vladimir Putin led a memorial ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Kremlin wall today, laying down a wreath in memory of World War II victims. The ceremony marked the 80th anniversary of the Nazi troops' invasion of the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, forces of Nazi Germany and its allies launched an invasion of the Soviet Union and started nearly 4 years of war. Russians are deeply proud of the role the Soviet Union played in crushing Nazi Germany during what they call the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945, in which some 27 million Soviet citizens died and which ended with Soviet control of Eastern Europe. Well, that's all for the program today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.